Bill and Melinda Gates and Warren Buffett changed philanthropy in 2006, and now they are doing it again. In a dramatic announcement that could have huge implications for the world of giving, the three of them said today they're asking America's wealthiest people to pledge at least half of their net worth to charity. They're calling it the Giving Pledge. It encourages donors to give to their favorite cause, but not to any particular foundation. Today's announcement does not ask for specific grants. It simply asks for a moral commitment. There have been 4 pledges already acknowledged. They are Eli and Edith Broad, John Doerr, Gary Lindfest, and John and Tashia Morgridge. If successful, the pledges could generate $600 billion for a wide variety of specific needs. The historic partnership between the Gates and Buffett began in 2006 when Buffett pledged 99% of his $40-plus billion fortune to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Bill and Melinda Gates and Warren Buffett came to our table to talk about that extraordinary joining of forces at the time.
It's something I've always planned. My wife Susie and I had planned that whatever I made would go back to society, and originally I thought she would outlive me and that she'd make the big decision on it, the manner. But since her death, I had to rethink the best way to get the money into society and have it used in the most effective way. And I had a solution staring me in the face. And I'd seen Bill and Melinda do what they have done with their foundation. They've done it with their own money. They poured themselves into it. The decisions are great. Their goals are similar to mine. So the time is now.
Bill has already given you a book to start reading about all these issues.
He gave that to me last night. Yeah, there'll probably be a quiz after the show, and I'll flip it.
We'll get to some of those questions. How much do you know about malaria and tuberculosis?
Yeah, right. I think he wants me to contract all these diseases just so he can work on it.
How do you two see the significance of this for you, for the causes you serve?
Well, for us, it's just fantastic because we look at it as doubling the impact. The diseases we've already been working on and the education and the inequities we've been looking at for so long just basically double by Warren's gift, and it's incredible the depth that we'll be able to go to on some of these global health issues.
Bill?
Well, it's a huge responsibility. In some ways, if you make mistakes with your own money, you don't feel as bad about it as if it's someone else's. So now we're even more intent on doing it right. And it's a very exciting time. The advances in medicine and other things we can do to relieve poverty, we've been making good progress. And with the doubling of resources, we think our impact can even more than double. And so it's thrilling, but it's a huge responsibility.
The idea for the Giving Pledge originated with Warren Buffett and led to a series of dinners organized by the Gates. The first was held in 2009, hosted by David Rockefeller at Rockefeller University. Other dinners across the country brought together men and women of huge wealth to talk about the experience of giving. The Giving Pledge is targeted at the richest billionaires in America. Hopefully it will spread around the world. I flew to Redmond, Washington last month to record a conversation about today's announcement with Warren and Bill and Melinda. It is their only television appearance regarding this extraordinary pledge. In addition to this program, Carol Loomis also has a story in an article called The $600 Billion Challenge, appearing today in Fortune magazine. At the time of the conversation with Bill and Melinda Gates and Warren Buffett on the Microsoft campus in Redmond, I agreed to delay telecast of this conversation until the joint announcement could be made in Fortune magazine and on this program. We began first asking Bill Gates what is the pledge, what they hope it achieves, and how it came about.
Well, it's quite simple. The idea is that people who are engaged in philanthropy will write a letter talking about what they're doing, and they make a commitment to give the majority of their wealth either during their life or through their will. And we want to get the people who do this together. We think they can share ideas, learn from each other, encourage others. And so we're kicking this idea off and going to invite lots to join in.
So you can give at any time.
You can give any time. The idea is to make the commitment, to get over the hurdle of saying, don't wait until I think about this later in my life, but think about it now and think about giving. And we hope actually a lot of people will end up choosing to give during their lifetime, because it's not just about giving their money. They can wait till the end if that's what they want to do. But when people start thinking about philanthropy and putting their minds to it, it can change society. And so it's neat to get together and to get to talk with people about how they are thinking about their philanthropy.
Yeah, the pledge is a contract or moral obligation?
It's a moral obligation. We don't want people to go to their lawyers and have them tell them that they need a 40-page document with 28 escape clauses or something. If I would say that almost everybody that would make a pledge like this would keep it. I mean, and it's a serious pledge, but it's not a legal pledge. It's a moral pledge.
This is not about the Gates Foundation. No. This is about this idea that you hope people will buy into. The driving idea is to have people think about philanthropy, think about what?
Well, it really came out of some dinners that we had with people who are engaged in philanthropy, and it was so wonderful to hear what they were doing, their excitement, how they changed over time, and we decided that was so helpful to us, and it drove up the energy in the room for, I think, everybody through 3 different dinners we did like that the discussion became, okay, how do you draw other people in? People tend to wait. They may not know all the neat things going on. And so through those discussions, the idea of a pledge came up. And actually by the 3rd dinner, it was quite concrete. Keep it simple. It's not a pooling. It's not saying some way of giving is right. It's a pledge. And the people who take that pledge will be getting together and celebrating the diversity of the way they do things.
How did the dinners come about?
Well, we started originally, I think, talking about just the idea of what stimulated us to give back and how do you stimulate other people to do it. And I think Warren initially started that conversation with us, and we said, well, let's get some other people together to talk about this. And so then we had this idea of having this first dinner, which David Rockefeller hosted. And then from there, it kind of just took on a life of its own because people brought in their own thinking to it and their own ideas. And then that's where we ended up landing on this idea of, let's give a pledge. And I think one of the cool things we learned in the dinner is that, we know this philanthropy is very personal. And so to us, it doesn't matter what people give, whether it's to the culture or to climate or to humanity or to societal issues. It's what they're driven by that gets them to give. And we just want to make sure that they're thinking about giving. And there's a lot of energy around that
Take me back to the first dinner and what it was like and what was the feeling, what were the questions?
Well, we didn't know going in. I mean, and David Rockefeller was very nicely hosted this dinner. We had maybe 7, mostly couples. There might have been 1 or 2 that were there singly. And we just started going around the table. And I asked each, either couple or individual, to sort of give a story of the evolution of their own philanthropic thinking and how they got where they are now and what they hope to accomplish. Well, it was incredible because it was probably 2 hours to get around that table, Charlie. People, they wanted to talk about their ideas and they wanted to listen to the others. I mean, they were just as interested when the other person was talking as when they were. So by the time we got around that table, I think maybe we were starting to form a little idea that if this sort of enthusiasm and commitment could be talked about to others, that there might be many people out there who really have sort of postponed thinking about what they're going to do with their wealth and all of that to get active now.
And what were the kinds of questions people asked?
Well, everyone has their own story of what cause drew them in, how they involve their children, how they learn about that cause. And they had a lot of questions. Topics came up that there were a lot of different ideas around, but the general energy and kind of a wish that you could share how much fun it is and that people knew what impact you could have. And one thing Warren likes to say is no one said that they felt bad that they'd given the money. Everybody felt more fulfilled, were able to use their creativity in some special ways, and they wanted to think about how you would share that. And what it's ended up being is this very straightforward pledge that's going to lead to people getting together on a regular basis.
But Charlie, I would bet if at the 3 dinners, maybe there were 20 or so couples involved, I would bet that a number of them, as committed as they'd been before, left with new ideas and an even firmer determination to get on with it in terms of what they'd already believed. I mean, it was, maybe that's what happens at church services. I don't know, but all I can tell you is it was noticeable.
How are you going to choose who you're going to reach out to to propose a pledge?
Well,
We thought we'd start with you, Charlie.
Yeah, there you go. Well, the people who came to the dinner, actually several of them came to us right after and said, I'm really interested in this idea. So we already have 4 people that have said to us, look, we want to be included in trying to help get others to give. But we'll reach out to the 20 or so couples that came to the dinner, after we start talking about it more, and then we and they will continue to reach out to others to say, this is something that's doable. This is something we'd like to get people to sign up for.
Is there a structure? Is there a process? Is there an organization to be?
There's a website called givingpledge.org that people can go to, and that's where we will put up all the pledges. So the people who sign the letter that say, I'm going to give away 50%, the letter will be up there, the pledge, and then people will write a bit, like a 1-pager or 2-pager about how their philosophy of giving. Those will all be up on that website. And as well, that website will link to other places. There are a lot of other people that have been giving for a long time or think about giving. There's a website called bouldergiving.org that actually helps people think about how do you give your money away, and we'll link out to those places.
So, Warren, somebody comes to you and says, I've been reading about this. Tell me why I should do a pledge.
Well, you should do it only if it appeals to you personally. It's your money. And I'm not going to tell you how or why or anything of the sort. I can tell you what it means to me, and I can tell you what it's meant to a number of other people that I've talked to over time. It's different for every person. They've got different kinds of assets. They've got different interests. If somebody in their family was hit by a specific illness, they're much more likely to be interested, for example, in research on that or something of the sort. But what I would tell them is at least think about it and decide what you want to do. Many people, rich people live longer. One advantage of being rich. And so often, those wills are made by people in their late 80s or early 90s when their faculties aren't as good, when their thinking isn't as good. It's part of the reason I made a decision when I did, 4 or 5 years ago, because I did not think my thinking, if I lived to be 90, would be as good as my thinking at 75 or as clear. And we just want people to decide what they want to do, but to listen to the experience of others who have decided to go in a given direction to see whether it appeals to them. And I think it will appeal to many.
What has it meant to you?
Well, I've had a philosophy really sort of all my life on what should happen with my Berkshire shares. So every share is going to go to charity. And the truth is, I've had everything in life I've ever wanted. I have never given away any money that's caused me to give up a movie or a dinner or a trip to Disney World or anything of the sort. So it's cost me nothing. So I have these little pieces of paper in a safe deposit box, which I bought about 40 or 45 years ago, and they've grown in value enormously. And what they are is they're claim checks on something in the future. I don't have anything I need in the future. All kinds of other people have all kinds of needs. And it's a way of cashing those claim checks in a way where people's lives are changed for the better. Mine's already changed for the better. I mean, it couldn't get any better. And if those little pieces of paper can translate, whether it's into children avoiding diseases, becoming better educated, whether people having a better life in their old age, whatever it may be, that's terrific. And I think a lot of people feel the same way.
What has it meant to you to be engaged in a philanthropic effort that touches the lives of other people?
Well, it's become really our full-time focus, and there's so much that can be learned. There's great progress that gets made. There's setbacks. There's partnerships you find. People who work in the field, people who do science, and it's been way more fun, way more engaging than we would have anticipated, and the opportunities are so clear. Now, our way of going about it is one of many, but it's been really the most special experience, I'd say, for me personally, and for us doing something together as a couple.
Absolutely. I think, and if you'd said to us, would we be as involved as we are now at the ages we are now? If we looked back, when we first got engaged or first got married, we wouldn't have known that we were going to be so drawn in and that it would be such a deepening part of our lives. I was just in India in March. The first person I wanted to come back and talk to about it was Bill. Bill just got back from India Saturday morning. We spent a lot of Saturday talking about then what he learned in India. So to be able to do it together and to see how it's evolved over time for us as a foundation and as a couple, I think that has been really engaging for us. And as we talk to these other families when they came to these dinners, hearing how they got started, where they started in one place and they evolved, I think that's what it's like for anybody that gets involved for whatever issue that they choose.
Are there reasons that people don't do more today?
Well, I think they postpone the decision very often, and I think
Because it's complicated, because they don't quite know how to go about it?
That some people, think, how would I start a foundation or something of the sort, or how will I handle it? Just assume that they've got a private business that's worth a great deal of money, but they think, how can I actually start giving money away now without giving away my business or something? There's answers to all those sort of things, and actually, in talking to these people at these dinners, we learned how they dealt with problems like that. But until they listen to somebody else, some people may just decide, I'll think about that tomorrow.
It sounds like these were emotional dinners. I mean, people talking with...
They
were telling their life story and how they got where they
I felt
were.
like a psychiatrist at some point. I mean, they talked about, most of them had children, or many of them had children that participated with them. Some of them had children that opted out from it. I mean, they had all kinds of different experiences, and people were fascinated by it. I mean, you've heard Bill and Melinda just now tell about their story about
changing their lives.
And we heard tale after tale like that. Charlie, I think in our San Francisco dinner, it may have taken us 3 hours to get around a table where like 7 couples spoke. I mean, they opened up. They really opened up.
It's a real mind shift. If you've been making money, giving away is a bit different, and you're not sure if you're going to find your way in it. You're going to find something. So it requires taking a little bit of a leap, and you don't know how fulfilling that's going to be. You need to pick your scope, because otherwise you're going to get more requests and you'll know how to deal with. You need to think about the structure and how you involve people. But it is so fulfilling, and these are very talented people. Society is better off if they choose to take some of their insights, some of the great people they know who also want to work in a philanthropic way, and draw them in. If they're collaborating with others, even though there's no agenda in the Giving Pledge, we do expect that people will meet each other and find common causes to work on together, no matter what it may be. And we saw a little bit of that in the after dinner conversation. So we want more critical mass around this. We want more lessons. We want more, hey, think about it now, get involved in an earlier way. And the people at the dinners said, yes, this is very straightforward, but it's something they felt that really should be done.
Charlie, I think there's 2 things that you bump into. One is people feel they will be swamped with requests. I mean, they see their life, just being a big lion outside their office or something of the sort, and nobody's looking forward to that. And the second thing I think they worry about is their money being used effectively. I mean, they'll read about a story about this charity or that charity, and they're used to having measurements that in their own businesses or whatever it may be, and things that are very specific. And now you're talking about doing something through other people to help people 10,000 miles away. So they want to learn more about how do you do this right. And if they listen to the kind of people we listen to, they will learn more about how to do it right. And we'll teach them how to say no to those people who get lied to.
Talk a bit more about the emotion, though. What was like in the room with people at these dinners that served such a pivotal place to turn you guys into creating something special?
And I think that's what surprised us the most. We went into these dinners and you kind of didn't know what to expect. But to hear couples really talk about how they wrestled with this over time. I heard one couple said, it was really sweet, he said, I always know my wife is going to bring up a big topic about philanthropy when we're driving together on a long drive and she turns the radio down. And they went on to talk about the most substantial gift they'd ever given, their first enormous gift, and how that then led to a lot of other gifts and how they think about it. So what was so neat about the dinners was people talking about sort of how they thought this early part of their life of making the money, but then how their mind was starting to shift and how some of the really small gifts were impactful to them, but how the large gifts were too. And then to hear them share with one another, here's where I started with my target. I didn't really know where to go in this space, but here's how I learned. And then somebody else would say, oh, but I thought of that in education too. How did you tackle this particular piece? Because a lot of people are talking about, in some cases, education in the United States, if that's what they're interested in, or climate change. So I think that's what drew us in. And one of the things Peter Singer talks about in his book about saving lives is he says, we do what our reference set does. And so if you see somebody in your reference set doing what feels right to you, and you see them having success and it actually making change, you're more likely to act and you're more likely to be at your best. And I think for us sitting around that table, we were sitting with our reference set and we were hearing amazing things we didn't expect to hear.
What's the metric of success?
I think it's
the
saying
Giving Pledge?
That we've gotten people earlier in their life, in this reference group of people, in this set of billionaires, to think earlier in their life about how they're going to give money back, whether it's during their lifetime or whether it's at their death, but that they've planned for it. They haven't pushed that decision off, and they've really started to think about it and to get going. If we've done that amongst this set and said, that really is the way to think about philanthropy, you should think about these resources going back to society, then I think we'll have started the conversation and felt great about it.
And in 2008, I just looked at that was the most recent estate tax figures. The estate tax forms that were filed, a little less than 40,000 of them, showed estates of about $230 billion. That's 1 year in the United States. About 12% of that was left to charity, of that $230 billion. And I would hope 10, 20, 30 years from now that number's a lot bigger than that, and I'll bet it will be.
If this is a roaring success, what are the possibilities and the difference it can make?
Well, the history of philanthropy is an amazing thing. The libraries in America, Carnegie had a lot to do with that. Some of the medical research, Rockefeller had to do a lot with that. Highlighting causes that later became something that the government got involved with. Looking at the schools that the blacks were going to in the South, Rockefeller gave a lot of money to that and really showed the incredible injustice that was there. So we're building on a legacy of some brilliant work that really made a difference. And even in this era, we have people like George Soros who've been creative going into the new societies in Eastern Europe and trying to get those going. And I think, made a huge difference. He took a big risk. That's so creative. People like Chuck Feeney who've done amazing things. So if you look, there are models. Now we want diversity. We don't want people to fall into exactly the same patterns that other people have because the new ideas are so catalytic. But it really makes a difference. And it's, it's kind of the best of capitalism. Somebody makes money, which is very enjoyable, and you get, as Warren said, you lack for nothing. And then hopefully you're taking that ability and you're being smart that you say, okay, I was lucky, now let me create good circumstances for other people. In education, I know there's a lot of philanthropists that are funding things. It's making a huge difference in global health and climate. There's a broad set of things that would never happen without philanthropy.
But the point is, and you said this to me in a previous conversation in November of 2009, it's really, when you think about what could be done and how huge the problems are, what we're getting from philanthropy today is just a small beginning.
It is just the tip of the iceberg, but it can be used as a wedge on so many societal issues. If you look back 250 years ago, Adam Smith used to say that it was almost futile to even know what was going on around the world because you couldn't reach out and help somebody on another continent with their issues. Well, now we're so connected as a world, both from transportation to communication. We even have people at very small levels. You can go up on the website and give something through kiva.org and help, a woman with her farm in Africa. Or in the U.S., teachers now post what they need in their classroom, and through donorschoose.org, I can go say, or Warren can say, or one of these philanthropists, I want to make sure she gets the lesson plan funded that she needs, or her science lab. We're that connected. So whether you want to give in your local community, you want to give to something in the United States, you want to give something across the globe, it's easy to do now. And I think, for me, that's the moment in time that we're at now in philanthropy, and that's why this is so exciting.
Yeah, and this is 50% of wealth being pledged, but there are people who've got similar impulses that just don't have money, but they can pledge 10% of their time or something of the sort. I mean, the idea is really to have everybody thinking about the subject. Now, we're not, we can't do it totally retail, but everybody has the opportunity, whether it's to mentor some young kid or whatever it may be, and I give them every bit of credit, maybe more than some guy like me who just, hands over some stock certificates.
Yeah, and that is in fact a very important point. It is the notion of connecting to what you can do is not limited to being a billionaire. This is not a billionaires club that somehow has gotten together to say maybe we can make a difference.
No, we're saying
it is a powerful idea.
Right.
that has potential.
And it's the right thing for that set to do, but really, lots of people are talking about giving back, and people do things that are a lot more difficult than I think any of the three of us or the billionaires do themselves. When they're giving their time, or they're giving, half of what they make in a week, and they have modest means, to me, those are some of my heroes in philanthropy. And so we're saying this is what we think is right for the people that we know, but there's lots of people that we hope will be inspired by this, and lots of people we already know that are giving. That's fantastic.
Well, you mentioned Peter Singer, who has a whole series of ways at certain income levels, way below $1 billion, that you can make a certain percentage of that money and the difference it can make.
Absolutely. Or the Salwin family, who went and talked about this year, the book that they wrote. They gave half away as a family, where they said, we're going to take $800,000 and give that away and sell our dream house. And they were hesitant to go public with it because they said, we're not trying to make a statement, but they felt so good about it and they were inspiring others that they decided that was something they should talk about.
What are the lessons you have learned?
Well, you've got to get into the specific areas to start learning. Some problems are very difficult. Education is so important. Every little bit of improvement can help there.
In fact, you have said education is much harder than global health.
Yeah, it
Right.
may be.
Changing.
Yeah, it's not as subject to breakthroughs. We found that there are lots of people out there who aren't getting funded, whether it's education innovators, whether it's scientists doing new vaccines, and it takes time before you can draw those people in. And so I love the fact that lots of philanthropists focus on a pretty small number of things. If you try and do everything, then you're not going to get the joy of really knowing it deeply and having that expertise. For us, we picked a couple of things. The health and education are the biggest things, and those we're very happy we did that. We're going to stick with those because it's our focus. But we've got to cover the waterfront. We've got to have lots of different givers because there are many causes that we're not involved in that have got to be backed.
There's a kind of group support that comes out of it.
And that's why we'll gather, after people do pledge, we'll gather them once a year to really talk about these issues and to let them have workshops. We hope this will take on a life of its own. So they'll talk about how did you get started, what were the hurdles, what target area are you in, how did you think about your kids, and let them really muddle through those ideas. And we'll keep joining because we'll keep learning too, but we hope this takes on its own life and that they continue to gather.
People wrestle with the idea about how they get their kids involved in them. And some of them have been successful at it, some of them haven't been. But there will be more that will be successful if they listen to the ones that were successful.
It is said that the entrepreneurs today, younger entrepreneurs, are thinking more about philanthropy earlier than they ever have before. Is that your observation?
No, I think that's fair. Most of the examples from the past, people waited fairly long, and now when you have things like technology fortunes that are made in your 30s or 40s, that's kind of different. You can get to your 50s or even earlier and actually consider, should I shift my attention to this, or can I in parallel keep doing my work and yet be giving my wealth away in a way that has impact? I at first was reluctant to have the two different activities. Melinda and I talked about that and found a way of making it work. And you're going to have a lot more decades of very successful people deeply engaged in these issues. That really wasn't typical if you go back in the history of philanthropy.
If somebody comes to you and says, look, I want to do it the way you did, I want a hands-on involvement, should I do it or not? What would you say?
If you're enthused to do that, then clearly you should do it. Because the trips you take, the people you meet, will draw you in as much as whatever the wonderful contribution you made in making that fortune. And it broadens you as a person to be involved in these things.
You've been involved in it longer full-time than he's been involved in full-time.
Yeah.
What's the evolution in your thinking about philanthropy and its possibilities and its potential?
Well, I used to sometimes almost worry. I'd go out in the field to these trips to India or Bangladesh, and I think, oh my gosh, am I going to come back overwhelmed? Because there's so much need. But in fact, you go on the trips, and every time you do one, you come back and you see a nugget or a possibility or a way to do something. And so I would come back so energized, and then Bill and I would get to sit down and talk about it, and we'd read a whole lot more. We'd gather experts around us, and they would show us what's, we'd learn the whole systematic problem, and then they would show us what's possible. So every time we came back, it was a building on itself. And I would say that's still the way of our philanthropy. We're still learning in all the areas that we've chosen, our target areas. But we really did at some point say, these are our targets. These are the places we're going to focus. When Warren made his unbelievable gift in 2006, he said, keep doing what you're doing, don't try and broaden out, but keep taking risks. And I think that's the thing we keep doing, is saying, how do we learn in these areas and get better and build over time as a couple and as an organization with those that surround us?
Yeah, I think people get put off at first because as somebody who's analytic, you first have to level set and say, oh, wow, these schools are way worse than I thought. And the food situation of a poor person in Africa is way worse than I thought. And you can think, okay, that's kind of a downer. But as soon as you know that level and you say, look at where they get women's groups in, or they get better seeds, or you encourage government to take its resources and use them in a better way, you start to see the success stories. And so, as Melinda was saying, the theme at that point is much more, okay, we know where it is, and we're no longer ignoring it.
So you've talked to people on a global basis. You've talked to people in London, Paris, and elsewhere. How is their response different than the American response, if it is?
Well, I'd say one divide we saw is that if it's a first-generation fortune, if the person involved made that fortune, they feel a latitude to decide, okay, a lot of this should go back to society, and to pick exactly what that theme is. And because America's had more of those self-made fortunes where you could get enough capital, there was risk-taking that it can happen in a dramatic way, we've had more philanthropy. Where you see in places like India and China now some of that taking place, there are great examples of people who've committed to give away not just half, but in some cases virtually all of their money. So I'm not sure there's that much cultural difference. I do think it's valuable to get that initial innovator thinking hard about what should happen to these, what Warren calls claim checks.
Yeah. The idea, too, that is fascinating to read about this is a sense of how desperate the money is needed. How, as much as you guys have, and as much as the foundation has, there's so much more needed, that the central fact is the need for more funds.
It's huge. And anybody who gets into this, their funding can only be catalytic. It can only be the wedge, because the money that comes out of philanthropy will still be tiny compared to the world's needs. Right. And so you have to always say, how can the thinking that comes from these organizations, or the risk that these organizations will take, because they'll think of a problem in a different way, or they'll tackle something in a different way with their money, how will that then spread to actually change a societal issue? And that's how you've got to, when you focus on the big issues, that's how you've got to think about it.
And that argument, incidentally, there will be certain people that have been successful in business, and if you can show them how their money might be leveraged, I mean, that really appeals to them. So, I mean,
leverage is an idea you understand.
Other people, it's just the emotional, looking at a child that's been paralyzed or something. I mean, people respond to different motivations, but the leverage aspect is an important aspect. I mean,
and this is the first generation. I think we can say that these issues really are kind of solvable. Can everybody on the planet have access to good education? Can everybody on the planet have access to the food that they need? Can we, take the American dream of opportunity and renew that by having a better education system? These things are within reach. If you were a philanthropist 50 years ago, you just weren't going to see that the full achievement was possible. If you narrowed your vision to your neighborhood or your country, and that was a good way to go about it. But the amount of wealth in the world really is phenomenal now, and incentive systems means that it's very unequally distributed, and those incentive systems are very good things. What allows you to have those incredible incentive systems and yet equity? Well, philanthropy is one of the answers. Government programs along with philanthropy are really the way that you can have the best of both worlds.
I would argue even that
in terms of the wealthy giving to philanthropy, I would argue that it's not a bad thing in terms of your family. I mean, if you look at the Rockefeller family and the dozens and dozens that come from John D. Sr., I think the fact that he behaved as he did in terms of philanthropy and that his son then behaved that way, I think it's set a tone for the family that is vastly different than where you've seen people behave in exactly the reverse manner. I would say very few families would be hurt in any way by having active participation in philanthropy, and I think many would be helped a lot. I know in my own case, I think it's been very, very good for my family.
Tell me how.
Well, I have 3 children, and I enable them, my wife and I enable them to have their own philanthropic activities. I think they've become better citizens. I think they've become better sensitized to the problems other people have in this world. I think they raise their own children in turn better. I think they have better values because they've actually been able, really through my wife, initially probably was about 99% responsible, but they have been sensitized to what you can do in this world, and they've gone out and done it, and they've combined their own energies and talents with the money that was allowed to them. And I think they have a better feeling about themselves. I think their children have a better feeling about them. I know their parents have a better feeling about them. So, I think a philanthropic family on balance, I mean, there's all kinds of exceptions, but a philanthropic family on balance is going to feel better about themselves and their progeny than a family that has been hanging on to every single penny.
And when you think about also where philanthropy is going, and you think about this generation that's coming up now as well, I mean, who would have guessed that a few years ago a Pulitzer Prize-winning book, Mountains Beyond Mountains, would be about Paul Farmer, who really was backed initially by this incredible philanthropist in Boston, Tom White, who, at age 63 in 1983, he meets Paul Farmer, who's 23, going to Harvard Medical School. They hook up. Paul starts a clinic in Haiti. He's now got multiple clinics in Haiti. He's now gone to Rwanda and is working with the Rwandan government to transform the Rwandan health system. I mean, because of that linkage, there are now college students, and I know high school students, it's required reading to read that book. And so kids are starting to think about philanthropy in a different way and saying, that's a possibility. I could actually change something in the developing world like this guy did. But he needed to be backed by somebody. So the pieces have to go hand in hand. But I think you've got that generation thinking early on about how do I give back and what would it mean to my life to give back. And I think that's a great thing.
Are we down the road looking at something more than just a website? Are we looking at a structure and an organization that if this thing really gets off the ground in a way that's remarkable, you will need more than a website to do it? Why are you smiling?
I think it will be a movement that does grow and probably gets organized in some way. I mean, you could feel that from the 20 or so we interacted. They not only want to be doing what they're doing, but they want to carry the message to others.
They want to proselytize.
And they do. And plus there is this aspect about being smart about it, both maybe in the way you handle the assets to get into the giving stream, and then once it's in the giving stream, how it is handled. It can be smarter, maybe tax-wise for some people. I mean, who knows? But they will want to share ideas, and obviously, we should help. They should help in setting up some kind of facility over time that regularly has a forum for sharing those ideas, and there'll be people that have different ideas about where the philanthropy should go. I don't know what I'm not there to judge them, but if they have a good case, let them make it to other people.
And I think these 4 families that have already said they definitely want to be part of it, the Broads, the Lenfest, the Mortgages, the Doors, they will also start to talk about it and talk amongst their friends. And once there's initial group going, I think it'll have an energy of its own, and that group will decide exactly how this gets carried out. And it'll probably change a little bit over time as they learn what works when we get the first group together in the fall and say what really resonates. And so that was the idea, is just to get it rolling and get the momentum to happen and then see what organically comes out of it. But to really get people to say, this is the right thing for this group to do.
These people are doers. I mean, they
yeah,
do.
That was clear.
Yeah, there were no shrinking violets.
I want to go back to that, though. I mean, tell me what you heard in these meetings that just touched you.
Well, there's people like Chuck Feeney who've given almost everything away. That's quite a phenomenal story. There's people like Ted Turner who, was kind of felt he was blazing new ground, and wanted other people to do it as well. And then you have people who found needs that were what pulled them in, and they didn't even expect it to be pulled in. But the more they knew about the need and the impact, they felt, boy, we really should do this thing. And many of them talked about their parents and how proud their parents would be.
Mm-hmm.
That's
And I think the other thing that was really touching in one of the dinners was as people talked about their children, how do you include them or not. One of the families talked about how they had an initial target on Health and Human Services as a couple. Their kids were just getting in their 20s, having their own careers, but they'd given the kids a little bit of money to let them start to figure this out too. And how the kids have now drawn them in a slightly different direction in Health and Human Services, and they feel incredible about the kids now and what the kids want to do with the money. And they say, look, we're now giving as a family, we enjoy doing it together, and when we leave and what's left to give is in the hands of our kids and we feel great about how they're doing it, they felt phenomenal about that.
Are there things that government should do in order to make this project better?
Well, I think it's very important that when philanthropy shows something can work, that there's some mechanism through the democracy to have government benefit from the kind of experimentation that philanthropy puts forward. I think our system in the United States is a mixed system where we have so much philanthropy, United Way, giving to many different causes. We've actually grown up so that government and this NGO sector are kind of complementary to each other. And it was interesting, in China, everything is the government today. And so when we were saying to people, you should give, or what are you thinking about it? They were sort of saying, boy, there's not an established set of things to give to. Right. And so maybe these wealthy people in China, part of what they need to do is help get that going.
Yeah.
So that it's very clear, okay, here's how do you give to schools, here's how do you give to
exactly.
rural needy people. The United States is way down a learning curve on that, and many of those organizations are supported by a mix of philanthropy and the government. So I do think there's a best practice from this country.
You may not know these numbers, but if anybody does, you would. If you just took the number that's on the Fortune 400 list of billionaires, or whatever, wherever the list stops, and they would make this pledge.
About $600 billion.
600 billion.
Yeah. I'll settle for 550 though.
Okay, but stay with me. Think about what I want to do. What that could do, and then think about how much of whatever the nut is that the Gates Foundation has today, and what percentage you use every year. I mean, what are you talking about in terms of annually a contribution to a whole range of things that have a need?
People give at least 5% because that's the minimum distribution. So you
have to give 5 in order to have
you can think about 30 billion coming out of a number like that. 30 billion a year is a phenomenal number, even if you're splitting it amongst dozens of causes. The catalytic change that would come out of that would be huge. A lot of that would be spent in the United States. Some of it would go outside the United States, and there's fertile territory in both places.
And don't forget also about foundations pushing on each other and pushing each other's thinking to improve, constantly improve. We've learned from so many people that got on early on in the charter school movement, or the Broad Foundation in education.
Right.
We share a lot of goals, but they look at it in a slightly different way. Chris Hahn and Jamie Cooper Hahn out of London, they have the Children's Investment Fund. We happen to hook up with them on some HIV/AIDS grants. They have made our grants better by pushing on our thinking about how we give that money out and how our grantees use the money.
Well, what is that thinking that so influenced you, in terms that you think is so important that you've learned about how to make the grants and how to push it out?
Because they'll go through and they might take a problem in a slightly different way than us, and they'll say, okay, you're giving your money in this way, but how does the HIV piece hook up with nutrition? The mother has to be able to eat and feed her baby. You're doing these nutrition grants, but are you really thinking about the linkages? And in their case, they had gone one step further than we had in their grant making. And so we backed up a little bit and said, okay, let's look at our grants in that way. That's what you want. You want to have that intellectual discourse where you're both coming at a problem from a slightly different way of thinking about it, or even thinking about the resources and making sure you're measuring it. We thought we were great at measuring. Turned out they were slightly better. We learned from them. That's a great thing.
And Charlie, going back to that $600 billion,
Right.
there's new wealth being created all the time. So that sets the tone for countless. I mean, we're talking, trillions over time, because it isn't just a static one-time thing. I mean, there will be more coming next year and the year after, and they will look at what people did before, and what you hope to do is establish a new norm.
Establish a new norm in terms of what's appropriate to do.
Yeah.
How did you settle on 50%?
We talked about it in that group, and
Why not?
It's not.
So that number came out of the group, out of the debt.
Absolutely.
It's not a maximum.
You'll take 100.
Well, I think there will be some people who come. Well, Chuck Feeney already has. I mean,
Absolutely.
Come to closer to
virtually
way beyond 50.
Yeah.
The sentiment in the discussion was, get people in, because once you get in, it'll be rare that somebody will stop at 50%.
Exactly.
Sure.
And in a sense, if you say to them, join this group that's committed to give the majority, which has kind of a clear, simple sound to it, and take it from there. If you make that bar of coming in, which does involve thinking about your estate and your assets and different people around you, so it's not an easy step to take. But once you take that step, our bet is that the average giving in this group, there'll be many ways to measure it, will be far in excess of that 50%.
Yeah, because once you get going and you start giving, there's a momentum. I mean, that was even true for us early on, where we kind of thought we knew how much we were going to give, and then we enjoyed it so much we started giving more in our lifetime. And I think we'll see that amongst
What was the enjoyment?
knowing that you could give a child the chance in the United States to get a great education, and all we're doing, if we can do that, is setting them on their way. It's up to them then, but you're handing them the opportunity. You're getting them to that starting line where we might have started because our parents could afford a great education.
I think there's two ways it's fulfilling. One is the outcome, just like when you do work and make a great product, it's the outcome. It's also the process, because in education, you're meeting teachers who are frustrated but care. You're meeting students who have potential that hasn't been realized. And when you sit down with groups like that, you've got a common cause. You're going to go after it. Somebody's going to come up with a new idea. Just the activity of being involved for those who choose to put the time in is every bit as stimulating as any piece of business making money activity.
And you believe, just in terms of the specifics, and we've talked about this on this program before, what you can do in terms of hunger, what you can do in terms of poverty, and if you raise the poverty level, it'll affect the population question. I mean, the numbers for children, fatalities in children, will stun you. If that can't make you want to make a commitment. In one example.
Yeah, the fact that it can be brought down. We're at about 9 million children die a year. It's one of many causes. It's one that happens to grab me.
Right.
And there are different things people can do to go after that. And philanthropy will be very catalytic in terms of how quickly we get that down to 6 million, to 3 million. And think of how much more just the world is. In 1960, that number was 20 million. And now we have a lot more births. So we've made some good progress between philanthropy, science, government giving. There are problems that appear intractable. When put on the right course, things can improve a huge amount.
Warren, you've made a lot of people rich. You know a lot of people that are rich.
Yeah. I know some that aren't on. I know some that aren't on that Forbes list too. I could add to that a little.
I mean, do you think there is within those people that you know some that this ought to resonate and is likely to resonate? Because you know who they are, you know how they think.
Sure, yeah. Charlie, I'm positive. I've seen some of them are self-starters on it. I mean, the ones that went with me early are in their. Many are in their 80s now, and some of them have given away very substantial amounts of money. We're not talking 50%. We're talking about 90 or 95% with these people, and others will join in. I don't like. I never go out and solicit anybody personally on that. But once they actually see the existence of this sort of thing, and they see some of the people that are mutual friends of ours do it, there's no question there'll be more money come out.
And I think over time, Warren introduced us to some of those friends over the last 20 years. And just, again, hearing what they had already done and what the possibilities were if it was education, stimulated our thinking about, oh, that's actually possible. It's knowing that it's possible, I think, is what drives a lot of people to say, oh, it's doable, I want to do it.
Charlie, I've got this group of about 50 or 60 people that get together every 2 years. I call it the Graham Group after Ben Graham. In 1999, I assigned Bill the talk, The Evolution of My Philanthropic Thinking. I would say that in the 42 years we've been doing it, that was probably listened to more carefully and remembered best by the people in that group of any talk we've had in that whole time. I mean, I am sure that affected some of those 58 people in what they did in the subsequent 10 or 11 years. So if we can get that out of one talk by Bill, just think what we can do.
Well, what was it you think that resonated so much in that talk?
It was a logical and emotional story of how somebody fairly young, he's still young, but but how he got to where he was, because he didn't start there. He didn't start there, and it was compelling. I mean, people were on the edge of their seat. I wish I'd taped it, but I will guarantee you that of the 50 or 60 people in that room that listened to that, some of them changed their behavior because of that, and they're glad they did.
It was even surprising to me because I thought this will be fun to talk about, but I could feel the same sort of dedication, fanaticism. Wow, this is obvious. This should be done. That I'd brought to the software world my whole life. That speech was somehow more fun to give than almost any speech I'd given, and it, what looked to be complicated. Okay, geez, health, isn't that a super complicated thing? Actually could be boiled down to a few metrics like the number of children who survive and a few conditions that cause that and a few things like vaccines you need to go after it. And so it's not necessarily that specific thing, but I think people were surprised that, wow, he doesn't like things that are soft. He doesn't like things that aren't measurable. He's clearly had a lot of positive feedback in his career. Yeah. And here you can see that shift. It really was catalytic for me just going through it.
When Bill was getting ready for that speech, we actually took several long walks because he was thinking through, to think through how you're going to explain your giving to somebody else is actually pretty tricky. And then right after it, we took several walks, which is how we tend to process together, to say, okay, based on that and even kind of what we heard in the room, is there anything we want to change about our giving too? And that's what's so great when you go to try and tell somebody else why you've done what you've done in the framework in which you're doing it. And so it ended up being very fun for both of us that Warren had asked.
Yeah, and in a sense, when we met these 20 couples, we asked them to do the same thing. Mm-hmm. They didn't know when they came to it they were going to be asked to do it, so they had to do it, spontaneously. But they rose to the occasion.
And the question was what did you ask them?
The question I asked them, and everybody answered it, was, tell me the evolution of your philanthropic thinking. How did you get to where you are now? Because you didn't start this way. I mean, and they told their stories. I mean, it may have been in terms of things personally within their family. It may have been the fact they struggled for a long time to make their first, dollars, and it was a long time in their life before they got there. But one way or another, they each had their journey, and as people listened to those journeys, they were affected, just like my group was affected when Bill gave that talk.
I think you said once that he took the speech more seriously than any speech you had seen him face ever before.
In quite some time, yeah. In terms of just really stopping and thinking it through deeply, thinking through how he wanted to explain how he'd come to the various pieces of it. Yeah, definitely.
So what we can hope comes out of this in part is back to your point, that people ask themselves to think about how they...
Well, Susie was there with me, and she said, why aren't you giving more?
It is a powerful idea. And congratulations and thank you for taking this time to talk about it. The Giving Pledge is the idea. Think about it yourself and think about the ideas that have been expressed here, and clearly think about the kinds of things that motivate you. Think about what it is that touches your own heart and what it is that affects your own emotion, because that is where you will find the deepest satisfaction. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.